Can you be a fan of a game you haven't even played? That's a question that's been the subject of some debate online. My first reaction was, well, no. I've always been under the impression that you have to have at least played a game to, like a game. But apparently I'm an uncultured troglodyte. You see, I had quite a learning journey ahead of me. I had a ballpark understanding, which I needed to drill down by synergizing my own learned truth with that of big data from the World Wide Web, so I could push the needle on this issue and lean into a better understanding. I'll circle back and touch base regarding my results. I did a poll, and the results really did surprise me, particularly with their unanimity. Apparently, you most certainly can be a fan of a game you haven't played, and this seems to be the popular consensus. Am I out of touch, or is it the gamers who are wrong? No, gamers can't be wrong. Gamers are among the most intelligent in our society. So I've got to break this problem down, understand why people think this. I've set out on a mighty quest like the great knights of old. Well, I guess we'll have to break down the question. A game is an activity with a set of rules engaged in for the sake of amusement. A video game is... you know what a video game is? Nerd. By playing, I mean have played the game at all, engaged with the interactive aspect. It doesn't mean completed, and a fan. I've got a few fan jokes that'll blow you away. Fan is short for fanatic, somebody with a single-minded obsession over a thing, a religious zeal. Seems like a bit of an exaggeration, at least until you remember that dream stands exist, or the nerd army for that matter. So going with that definition of fan, well, yes, it is possible to be a fan of a game without having played it. It is possible for anything to occupy such a significant amount of attention in one's mind. You can be obsessed about a game you haven't played, but also kinda no. It's complicated. Games naturally are an interactive medium, and the gameplay part is the most essential part of the experience. It's what gives games value as opposed to other mediums such as literature, film, and music. But to become an acolyte of a game without even playing it, I think that's almost selling games as a whole short. Can you really praise a game if you haven't actually engaged with its most important aspect, the gameplay? So I want to get into the headspace of the game watcher. Are they merely the cuckolds of gaming getting off to others' experience with the game? Or is it a bit more nuanced? Is there more to it than that simple generalization? Of course the answer is going to be yes. Why would I even ask the question otherwise? There are good reasons to opt for the vicarious experience of gaming. One quoted reason is time. Time is your most valuable resource on this earth, and many people are, understandably, short on it. Work can take it out of you. I understand these people struggle completely. Games are an inherently time-consuming activity. The average game will take longer than the average novel, certainly longer than the average movie or TV show. It is often hard for people to play without getting sucked in, like it's sandy cheeks. It doesn't help that so many games now are designed to monopolize your time. And it's not like there isn't demand from gamers for games that do monopolize time. People complaining about no grind in the game and no reason to keep on playing it after they've finished, and devs ultimately caving into that pressure. So, given that games are so time consuming, I relate to this issue of commitment as well. One interesting point I heard is that the games are simply too scary. This obviously applies to horror games like Outlast, Five Nights at Freddy's, or Halo 5 that are just too unbearable to play. I had a friend, believe it or not. And many years ago, this mate and I played games on the Xbox 360, but there were some games we couldn't play. Although he was hardcore in Team Snipers in Halo Reach, he couldn't handle horror. So, no Slender for him, right? Well, no, more like no COD Zombies. One day he called me up on the home phone telling me he'd just bought Skyrim, so I went over and tried it at his place, and I got to admit, back then it was pretty cool. What am I getting at here? Well, shortly after my first experience with the game, I heard back from him. He could play no more, as the Draugr were too scary. Not the giant spiders, these low-res weak zombie dudes. So I can fully understand horror driving somebody from a game. Another little odd one I heard is people are afraid of judgment. People don't want to be criticized for playing games, as I guess within their family it's seen as socially unacceptable. This is just proof of gamer oppression. If anything, they're doing a disservice by not vocally standing up for gamer rights within a gamer-phobic household. But genuinely, this is an unfortunate attitude that I do, thankfully, feel is becoming less common as time goes on. One popular line through all of this searching is this little piece of Reddit street knowledge. And that is basically that you can be a fan of football without actually playing football yourself. I don't really think this is an apt comparison. It's apples to oranges. Sports are, well, sports, and games are a different medium entirely. The closest analog would be MLG esports. Can you be a fan of esports without being a competitor yourself? Well, of course. But that isn't the experience of games for most people. For the average person, games are more like movies than sport. In single player at least. They're a structured experience, meticulously designed by its creators. Every enemy you battle is scripted by the developers. And when you look at it through this lens of it being like a movie, well, can you say you get the same experience of a movie when you haven't even watched said movie? Could you call yourself a fan of it? I mean, I guess you could. You could watch the trailers and watch all the fun scenes on YouTube, but it goes without saying that you don't get the whole experience when you do that. You miss the pacing, you miss the context behind important scenes. You don't follow the characters all the way through on their journey. When you've only watched the scenes that other people deem important, you're ultimately letting them determine the experiences you value and deem important. You're not really developing an opinion of your own. You can't really review or critically assess its value as a whole if you haven't witnessed the piece as it was designed to be witnessed. Likewise, with games, you need to have played it to be able to properly critique, praise, and assess the quality of a game. If not, you are, to some extent, merely absorbing cultural messaging around a game, joining in on a bandwagon. It's not a one-to-one comparison to film. You can get an idea of the plot, characters, world, and art just from YouTube videos, but gameplay in a game is the most vital context. It determines the pacing and mood. It's how the story is designed to be witnessed. It is meant to be the backbone for the rest of the experience. The best storytelling in games is the story told through your own gameplay. To suggest that gameplay is inessential to the experience of a game is, in my opinion, selling games short. It is suggesting that the core of the experience is mere ephemera that can be safely ignored. It is, in a sense, viewing the games industry as merely a gimped Hollywood. Nobody would argue that music could be enjoyed without sound. You can't properly appreciate a movie without the visuals, although you can enjoy the audio. Likewise, I don't think it's possible to truly appreciate a game without the interactivity. If you were to remove the gameplay aspect from games, many of the best written games of all time would only seem mediocre at best next to the greatest literature, because the gameplay is a vital dimension to the story in a game, and one where a significant amount of time is poured. I feel that the clout associated with a game in the public eye is often a contributing factor to this whole being a fan without playing thing. Countless cult classic JRPGs that have yet to be touched by their rabid fan base. Dark Souls is a great example of a game with this reputation. It has an imposing presence in gaming. It constantly generates discussion. It is completely natural to seek a sense of belonging in shared hobbies. I can see why people would desire to be a fan of this. People want to be part of the in-group. It doesn't help that Dark Souls also has this reputation of being so difficult as well, which serves as a barrier for potentially interested parties from actually playing the game. As such, often in this discussion, people bring up the Dark Souls series as a game they're a fan of without actually playing. This is where the calls for an easy mode in Dark Souls originate from. But here's the problem with that. Dark Souls wouldn't really be Dark Souls without its difficulty, and I certainly don't think it would have the clout that it does if it didn't have its difficulty. I think this phenomenon of many people experiencing the lore and story of a game through YouTube videos and articles has also affected the discourse as well. I think the Dark Souls story has a more positive perception than it would have if most people were just going off their own experience with playing the game. And this is another consideration when praising games you haven't actually played. It affects the discourse and ultimately the industry at large. There has been a movement towards movie games because, well, some developers do want games to be second-rate Hollywood. Because many people experiencing games through the lens of another player in a passive role will ultimately value things like aesthetics over somebody who's actually playing the game themselves. For as often as you hear people say they play games for the gameplay and not the graphics, you'll see a stupid complaint that just shows that people really do think otherwise. In shooters, for example, so often I see people value aesthetics over actual gameplay. Often it can be more important than gameplay and balance. Case in point, every game having to play like Call of Duty. Not the gameplay, but the aesthetic experience. Having to have an animation for everything. Having to add sprint. Because that's the aesthetic experience that people are used to, and the one they're used to watching, and the one they enjoy watching. I often hear this fallacy where people conflate fun to play and fun to watch together, like they're the same thing. It's mostly streamers who do this in front of their Zoom-brained, flossing, broccoli-haired audience. If this were true, if fun to play and fun to watch were one and the same, streamers wouldn't stream games they despise just because it'll get them the most views. Head down in depressed agony, but putting on a happy face for their Zoomer crowd to send them donations. What is fun to play and what is fun to watch are often quite separate, and this focus on viewing as opposed to playing will produce problems and ultimately damage games in the future. Other devs will try to copy what's popular on Twitch in hopes of recreating their success. So after this long trek of self-discovery, I've arrived at a decision. Yes, you can be a fan of a game you haven't played. You can obsess over the art, the plot, the music, the characters, and any other aspect of the game. But I would advise being careful when you praise a game you haven't actually played. When you celebrate and promote it as the highest art. There are certainly some reasonable judgments you can make based on the facts about a game and your prior experience, but you can't truly decide whether the game as a whole is good. You can't fully assess a game until you've played it. Devs have leaned so heavily into the aesthetic experience of their games, which isn't just the level and character graphics, but the UI, the hit markers, animation, audio cues, and sounds. I think this culture of watch as opposed to play has only contributed to this focus on aesthetics. I think games should lean into their strengths as games. The unique selling point of a game should always be the moments that can only happen when you're in the driver's seat. Not an experience that could be recreated in cinema, not an experience that could be recreated in a filmed clip. I come to gaming for unique gameplay experiences. I think stories in games should lean more heavily into their gameplay, and the gameplay should be used more often to tell the story. I think the visual aspects of a game should be used to build up the gameplay. I think that people praising a game based on what they've seen of it or because of a bandwagon isn't pushing games forward in this way. It's not improving the gameplay and design. Ultimately, I think it's great that people can enjoy the art and music of a game. I think it's fine that people can develop a parasocial relationship with their favorite Let's Player, but I think the discussions that push gaming forward ought to at least be done by people who play the game. I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.